An autumn morning in the south always seems special. The air is slightly humid, spicy, with a taste of past rains and a long past summer. Fallen leaves crunch underfoot, and its warm orange hue mixes with the grey shadows of the trees along the dusty road along which the old car was climbing. The stepson, who had long since stopped being called boy by everyone here, was returning home after many years of living in a big city. When James, that was our stepson's name, got out of the car, he paused for a moment, looking around. The usual longing for something long ago and a slight hint of anxiety mixed in his eyes. It is never easy to return home, especially if you know that not only your father is there, but also the woman with whom he has been associated for many years, despite all past conflicts and inconsistencies. As soon as he reached the threshold, the door swung open. Linda, his stepmother, stood on the threshold, a woman about 30 years older than him, but with that elegant austerity that made her look like a woman who owns the secret of time. High cheekbones, dark, almost black eyes that could be both cold and warm at the same time, and that fixed gaze that made everyone feel under close control. They stood opposite each other for a while, until Linda finally took the first step.
James, and you did come back. I didn't expect to see you so soon. I thought you liked life in the city.
Yes, do you think? Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. I came back because the time has come, and the house is still your own, not someone else's.
He stepped back slightly, nervously adjusting the strap of his travel bag. It wasn't that he was afraid of Linda, but every time she spoke, he had the feeling that there was something hidden under her cold exterior that he hadn't figured out yet. It was the kind of look that is hard to forget, which held and beckoned at the same time.
Not a stranger? You've been there so long, James, that I was beginning to think you had no reason to come back at all. Your father has already started to get used to your absence, but you came anyway.
She stared at him intently, as if hoping to figure out what really brought him back. Her father had told her more than once that James would most likely stay in the city forever, choosing his freedom and career, and that suited her. But now he was here, again, on her doorstep, and that meant something.
Sometimes it happens that you go back to where you didn't think to leave. And how's Dad? Is he here?
He went to the city to get tools. He'll be back in a couple of hours. You can take a walk for now, get settled in your old room, if it still suits you.
He nodded curtly and headed towards the house. James could feel her eyes on him as he walked up the stairs. She seemed to be looking at him longer than she should have. He understood that Linda also felt how everything around her was changing, and her calmness, her restraint, which had always attracted, today began to seem like some kind of mysterious force. As soon as he crossed the threshold of his lightwood-panelled room, he was overwhelmed by a wave of memories. Everything here reminded him of the past, of the time when he was young and did not know that moving away from his family would be so difficult for him. This silence seemed to sharpen all his senses, sharpened all his inner contradictions, which he tried so hard to forget in a noisy city. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on the door. Linda, still as calm and composed as ever, entered the room, holding a cup of tea in her hands.
Here. I thought you needed to warm up a little.
Thank you, Linda. I'm glad you're here.
He said it almost inaudibly, as if he was afraid to admit his feelings even to himself. And yet, there was a sincerity in his words that he hadn't felt for a long time.
Are you glad I'm here? It's funny because in the past we didn't always agree with you.
Well, yes, but then I was young and stupid, and you always seemed so far away to me, like on another planet.
Sometimes it seemed to me that you lived in your own world where there was no place for me. But apparently, we were both wrong.
They looked at each other, and at that moment, time seemed to slow down. Linda felt a strange warmth spreading inside her, but she knew it was just a fleeting moment. She had no right to give free rein to her feelings, especially towards her stepson, a man who could be her son by age. But their bond, what united them, was still stronger than any rules and prejudices.
I've missed home. And you too.
For me? James, do you know what you're saying?
She noticed how his eyes darkened. There was a strange gleam in them, a mixture of defiance and at the same time some kind of vulnerability. Linda suddenly felt how fast her heart was pounding, but of course she couldn't afford to show it.
I understand. Only sometimes people do things that, well, that just need to be done because otherwise you don't seem to be living your life.
James, you have a life. You have prospects. You have a future. Do you really want to drag yourself back into this swamp of family obligations? Why not just leave it as it is?
Because it's the right thing to do, or because maybe I feel like something is left unfinished here, or because...
They stood in silence, knowing that this would not be the end of it. As evening fell, the whole house seemed to be enveloped in silence, broken only by the sounds of the autumn wind outside the window. James helped his father with the housework, and Linda, as usual, cooked dinner in the kitchen. Her smooth, confident movements gave the kitchen something almost magical. It seemed that her every move was filled with meaning, even though she was just laying out vegetables and lighting a fire in the oven. James, trying not to attract attention, watched her from around the corner. He saw her profile illuminated by the soft light of the lamp and felt a strange, aching feeling run through his body. He had known Linda since childhood, but now his gaze rested on those features that he had simply not noticed before, on the smooth lines of her hands, on the slight crease between her eyebrows when she was intently cutting something with a knife. There came a moment when both of them met eyes. Linda held his gaze a little longer than normal communication required, and he felt something inside come alive and at the same time pinched. He came closer, as if attracted by an invisible force.
Is something wrong, James? Do you need something?
Maybe he just decided to help. Maybe you'll appreciate it.
He came closer to her and stood next to her, taking a knife to help chop the vegetables. At first, they worked in silence, but every time their hands accidentally touched, both felt a strange tension, as if an electric current was passing between them. They were standing so close that Linda could smell his skin, something fresh with a hint of woody cologne. The smell was driving her crazy, but she pretended that everything was fine, continuing to focus on the products in front of her. Still, she couldn't completely distract herself.
You know, it's city life is not like here at all. I've missed it all.
What, for vegetables? Cutting potatoes?
Well, to put it that way, things are different in the city. No one is in a hurry, and at the same time, everyone is running somewhere, and here it's kind of quiet, and you seem to look different here too.
Am I? James, I'm still the same as before. It's just that you're changing. You've gotten older, and now you see everything differently.
They fell silent again, but the tension became more and more palpable. Suddenly, Linda, deciding to distract herself, reached for a bowl on the top shelf. At that moment, James, instinctively deciding to help, also reached for the same shelf, and their hands collided again. This time, neither of them pulled their hand away. They froze, standing so close that their breath seemed to mix. James looked at Linda, and she felt his gaze penetrate right into her soul. For the first time in years, she felt as if someone had seen her real self, hidden behind the mask of an adult woman. Her heart was beating faster, and she knew she had to stop, move away, to avoid what was already on the verge.
Linda,
He wanted to say something important, but the words stuck in his throat. Linda felt her heart tighten, but staying close to him was beyond her strength. She took a step back, as if remembering who they were, and an awkward silence fell between them again.
James, maybe you should go back to your father. We have a lot of work to do, and I need to finish here too.
you're always so strong, so collected. But I know there's something else about you. Something that I'd like to understand.
James, this is too much. We're not here to sort out feelings. You're my stepson, and that's all that matters.
With that, she turned around and began to clear the table, pretending that the conversation was over. But James couldn't just back off. He knew that there was a connection between them that could not be easily forgotten.
But I don't want it to be all. And, don't you feel it?
She froze, feeling everything inside her rebelling against her own words, against her own beliefs. She couldn't afford to admit what drew her to James, but his words had awakened something she was trying hard to suppress.
James, there are some things we can't change. Both your feelings and mine are just an illusion. We have to be stronger than this. Otherwise...
Otherwise what? Otherwise we'll be alive? Linda, I'm not asking for anything impossible. Just let me know how you feel.
She turned away, not wanting to show how her eyes filled with tears. Her fear and insecurity were stronger than any feelings James could arouse in her. She understood that she had no right to such weakness, no right to succumb to this connection.
James, this is impossible. We have different destinies and we can't cross paths like that's, understand this,
He stood there, feeling his heart constrict at her words. He knew that her detachment was just a protection, that deep down she wanted it too, and yet their conversation ended in nothing. Linda left him in the kitchen, feeling as if an invisible boundary had been laid between them. These words remained suspended in the air, as if they both did not dare to say what they really felt. The evening dragged on, and a thick silence hung over the house, filled only with the sounds of distant crickets and the creaking of branches in the wind. James spent the whole day avoiding communication with Linda, trying to hide his inner worries. He knew that all their recent meetings, touches, brief glances pointed to something more than just a warm family relationship. Tension was building up in him, which he could no longer contain, and each new glance in her direction only intensified this feeling, pushing it to the limit. When dusk enveloped the house, James's father, tired after work, went to bed, leaving James and Linda alone in the house. They went to different rooms, trying to go about their business, but it was as if some invisible threads connected them, not allowing them to stay away from each other. James could feel her presence in the house, could almost feel her breathing, and the air between them seemed to be getting thicker. He was standing by the window trying to collect his thoughts and understand what was going on in his heart and mind, when suddenly he heard her footsteps behind him. He knew that he could no longer hide from these feelings. He could not remain a bystander when this unbearable craving was bubbling inside him. And when Linda, frozen for a moment, passed by, he felt that this was his last chance to do what he had been afraid to do until that moment. Their eyes met, and he saw in her eyes the same inner tension that weighed on him. It was a mixture of fear, insecurity, but also a genuine desire that she could no longer hide. When Linda walked past him, stopping at a shelf of books, James came so close to her that he could feel her breath on his cheek. He gently reached out and touched her shoulder. It was an almost imperceptible, light touch, but it immediately reverberated inside both of them like a lightning strike. Linda froze in place, her body tensed, as if she had been expecting this touch, but still wasn't ready for it. She did not pull away, did not try to leave, and this tacit agreement gave him confidence. James paused to feel this moment fully, listening to her breathing, to the faint pounding of her heart, which he could barely distinguish, but which was no less real than his own feelings. He knew she was still fighting with herself, that she couldn't just allow herself to be honest, but there was more truth in that touch than in any words they could say to each other. James slowly ran his fingers along her shoulder, feeling her hold her breath. Her body, initially tense, began to relax a little, accepting his touch. She closed her eyes, as if trying to keep this moment in her memory, or maybe trying to forget about all the rules and prohibitions that seemed so important a moment ago. They were both hypnotized, and the silence surrounding them was filled with such dense energy that it seemed like a little more, and this invisible wall between them would collapse. James knew that this moment would change everything, and that his life would never be the same if he took the next step, but he also realized that he had already gone too far to stop. Their hands touched, and that simple touch made him even more determined. He slowly brought her hand to his lips and left a light kiss on her fingertips, making it clear that his feelings for her were much stronger than anything he could have imagined before. At that moment, Linda opened her eyes and looked at him with the same depth and warm tenderness that he craved. She pulled back slightly, and there was a struggle in her gaze, between the fear of condemnation and the strange certainty that this was her choice, her moment. But James didn't let her go far. He took a step forward and gently ran his hand over her cheek, feeling her skin warm under his touch. Linda didn't turn away or try to hide her excitement. Her heart seemed to be beating in unison with his, and now there was nothing holding them back anymore. He didn't look away, watching the fire light up in her eyes, a fire that was not only the result of a sudden impulse, but also something deeper, something that connected them on a level for which there is no simple explanation. Linda slowly ran her hand over his arm, as if saying goodbye to her own fears, and her touch awakened waves of emotions in him that he had not experienced before. Now, they both knew that nothing could stop them. James took the final, decisive step, getting very close to Linda. Their breaths mingled, and in that moment, in that barely perceptible movement, there was everything they couldn't say out loud. Linda closed her eyes, and James realized that this was a sign that she was ready, that she accepted his feelings, despite all the fears, all the internal contradictions. When his lips touched hers, time seemed to stop. This kiss was neither violent nor passionate. It was soft, warm, and at the same time filled with all the pain and longing that they had hidden up to this moment. It was a kiss that reflected all their long-awaited intimacy, their tension and pent-up feelings. James could feel her breathing getting deeper, her body responding to his touch, accepting him as if they had always been connected by something that could not be explained. They stood immersed in this intimacy, not thinking about what would happen next, not imagining how their lives would change after this moment. All their fears, doubts, and prejudices dissolved in this kiss. James felt that this was exactly what he had been waiting for, that this moment was the meaning of all those long years he had spent away from her, searching for something that was always there. Linda, trembling with emotion, slowly pulled away, her eyes glistening with tears, but there was no fear in that look anymore. She knew that they had crossed the line beyond which there was no return to a familiar relationship, but now it no longer mattered. They made their choice by choosing each other, despite all the doubts and prohibitions. James ran his hand through her hair, touching her with tenderness and respect, as if she was something precious to him that he had found in this world. He understood that a difficult path awaited them, but now, at this moment, they were both free from all conventions, and they needed nothing but each other. After their first kiss, everything changed, but they both knew that they couldn't openly admit their feelings. Life continued to flow as usual. James's father unsuspectingly performed the usual household chores and worked on the farm, while James and Linda, locked in a silent agreement, hid their feelings behind carefully chosen words and impeccable restraint. But every moment they spent together, every surreptitious glance, became proof that they could no longer resist this connection. During the day, they behaved as usual, observing decency and controlling themselves. But at night, when the house was silent, they met in secluded corners of the house or went out to the old barn, where they could afford to be themselves. These secret meetings became their salvation. They knew that they could only spend a few hours together, but these moments were enough for them to feel free, away from all social obligations and prohibitions. Feeling all the awkwardness and tension of these meetings, they found solace in each other, feeling their bond grow stronger despite all the risks. James found every opportunity to be alone with Linda. He no longer needed to explain his feelings. They were so deep and obvious that he felt them even on a physical level. In her presence, his heart beat faster. Every moment was full of meanings that he had not noticed before. Linda, restrained and cautious by nature, hardly allowed herself to show her true feelings, but next to James, she became different. Her gaze softened, her movements became smoother, and there was always that invisible but tangible tension between them that they could not ignore. Their trips to nature had become their little secret. James invited Linda to visit the hill behind the house, which offered a breathtaking view of the vast expanses of fields and forests. There, among the trees and dense grass, they found their refuge from the whole world. Nature seemed to understand their feelings, and in these places their relationship ceased to be forbidden. They became part of something more, like an ancient ritual. Every night, when the stars were shining in the sky, James would sneak down the hallway to her room, trying not to make any noise. Linda was already waiting for him, sitting by the window and peering into the night sky, as if looking for answers to her inner questions. They looked at each other in silence, realizing that they were no longer held by any obligations, other than those that they had created for themselves. These nightly meetings were filled with awe. Their embrace was soft but deeply sensual. They held hands, knowing that each such moment could be the last, that their happiness was too fragile. Linda gradually opened up to James, telling him about her past, about fears and hopes that she had long hidden even from herself. She was opening her heart to him, her vulnerability, and James accepted it as a precious gift, realizing that she had never allowed herself such intimacy with anyone before. He felt like her protector, her support, and it seemed to him that he would do anything for her. Each of their dates was filled with the thrill of being on the edge, the line between happiness and risk. A secret passion filled their lives with new colors, and although they realized that they were in a dangerous zone, it only strengthened their affection for each other. Their secret relationship became their personal reality, and every moment spent together strengthened their confidence that they would not be able to live otherwise. Hidden walks in the mornings and evenings became their way of escaping from reality. Sometimes James would come to her early in the morning, before the sun had even risen, and they would walk along a forest path surrounded by tall grass and trees. The silence of the morning forest sheltered them from the whole world, and only the singing of birds disturbed this peace. At such moments, they felt free and forgot about all the rules. There, alone with nature, they could be themselves, and their every step, every look, was filled with that closeness that cannot be shared with others. But their feelings couldn't go unnoticed forever. Over time, James began to realize that even the most hidden meetings attract the attention of others, even if not explicitly. Neighbors noticed his frequent walks through the woods and sometimes looked curiously at where they led. His father, although he did not ask unnecessary questions, became more and more silent and thoughtful. And James knew that his detachment could arouse suspicion. For James and Linda, every day was a test of their resilience and determination to keep their feelings alive. They realized that they were too deeply caught up in this love to give it up, but they also realized that their secret could destroy not only their own lives, but also their family. Linda sometimes looked at James thoughtfully, as if torn between the desire to be with him and the duty to keep calm and balance in the family. However, despite all the fears, their bond continued to strengthen. Linda often sat on the porch in the evenings when James, returning from another walk, sat down next to her for a short time. These quiet, silent moments became a reminder for them that love does not always scream. Sometimes it lives silently in their hearts and looks at the setting sun. There was more in those moments than in any words they could have said, and James knew that in that silence their bond grew even stronger. Night after night, day after day, James and Linda lived in this fragile reality where their love existed only for them. Their secret meetings became their quiet protest against a world that could not understand and accept their feelings. These rare moments of happiness, filled with looks, touches, became everything they had for them. Over time, it became increasingly difficult to hide their relationship. Linda and James lived in constant tension. Their every move and meeting became a small ritual of deception to which they hardly got used. But even this caution could not protect them from the scrutiny of others. People, as usual, noticed and gossiped. Their nocturnal meetings and walks in the woods could not go unnoticed. In a small town, rarely anything is hidden from prying eyes. And soon, James's father began to notice changes, which was the beginning of a devastating family conflict. For James's father, at first everything seemed like minor accidents. He blamed James's estrangement and Linda's strange behavior on ordinary family difficulties and did not suspect the real reason. However, over time, it began to seem to his father that something was going on between them. But the idea of a possible connection between his stepson and his wife seemed to him as incredible as it was terrible. He tried to ignore these suspicions, blaming everything on his excessive anxiety, but the feeling that their relationship had gone beyond the bounds became more and more pronounced. Every evening at the family dinner, Linda and James almost avoided each other, afraid to reveal their excitement. Their gazes were pointedly distant, their movements strained, and James's father noticed this. Being in the confined space of the house, they were forced to play their roles, trying not to give themselves away, but this pretense only increased the tension between them and their father. His looks, his sudden questions, became a test for them. Linda increasingly seemed depressed. Her face expressed fatigue and inner struggle, and James could not help but notice how this situation was destroying her from the inside. The real outbreak of conflict occurred when James's father accidentally overheard a conversation between two neighbors. They whispered about the rumors that James and Linda spend too much time together, and one of them sarcastically said that such things usually lead to trouble. James's father, who always considered his wife reliable and faithful, was really shocked by these words. Rumors born of envy or malice hurt him deeply. But they also made him think. If before he could turn a blind eye to some strange things, now after hearing confirmation of his fears, he realized that he had to figure everything out on his own. When James's father asked Linda a direct question, demanding an explanation, her reaction confirmed her worst fears. Linda, usually reserved and calm, could not find words. Her face turned pale, and she only lowered her gaze, which for James's father became a mute confession. This silence turned into an accusation that made him feel betrayed and confused. It seemed to him that everything he believed in had collapsed, and he could no longer look at his wife or his son calmly. After this conversation, there was silence in the house, heavy and overwhelming. James's father withdrew into himself, and an almost tangible wall lay between all the household. James felt guilty, but he couldn't and wouldn't give up his feelings for Linda. He knew that their love would cause the destruction of the family, but it was beyond his strength to give it up. For Linda, the situation was even more painful. Between her love for James and her sense of duty to his father, she found herself in an unbearable position. She saw James's father leave the house every day, avoiding her and James, and this only increased her sense of guilt and responsibility for the destroyed family. This conflict was deeper than just a family quarrel. James's father has always considered himself a man with strong moral principles, a man who values family ties above all else. But now he realized that his family was falling apart and that he had no one else to rely on. It seemed to him that Linda, whom he could always count on, had betrayed him by choosing his own son. This internal conflict was destroying him from the inside out, making him feel empty and lonely. His days passed in silent estrangement, and at night he could not sleep, plunging into painful thoughts about what had gone wrong. Linda and James realized that their love was not only destroying their own lives, but also destroying the peace and quiet in the house that had once been their mainstay. But their feelings were too strong for them to just back off. These feelings made them look for each other, even in moments when it was obvious that everything would end in disaster. They were like two souls, connected by an invisible thread that could not be broken. Every moment spent in the house seemed like torture to them, but they couldn't be apart either. Soon, neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances began to openly talk about what was happening in the house. Their whispers, their looks of condemnation became more and more explicit. James felt that their lives no longer belonged to them alone. These judgmental glances weighed on him, making him feel angry and a sense of protest. He understood that society would never accept their relationship, that their love would always remain beyond understanding and acceptance. But he also knew that his love for Linda was the only truth he had found in his life. One day, when the tension reached its limit, James's father spoke to Linda again. Their conversation was short, but its meaning was clear. Their family could no longer exist in this form, and Linda had to make a choice. This moment was for Linda the culmination of all the pain and despair that she was trying to suppress in herself. She realized that her love for James could never be accepted by either society or her husband, and that they were both on the verge of a catastrophe from which there was no escape. After this conversation, Linda spent a long time alone, thinking about her future. Her heart was torn between her love for James and her sense of duty to his father, between the right to be happy and the need to maintain respect for the family she had once created. She understood that her choice would determine the fate of everyone, and that not only her future, but also the fate of those she loved, depended on her decision. James couldn't bear to watch her suffer, but he couldn't offer her a way out either. He knew that they were both in a situation from which there was no easy way out. Their love became a test for them that they were not ready for, and every moment of their lives was now filled with a painful choice between their own happiness and the destruction of their family. Now they were on the verge of making a final decision, realizing that no one would be able to understand their love, and that they would either have to abandon each other in order to save the remnants of their family, or risk everything they have in order to stay together. Linda and James were in a state of utter devastation. After the conflict tore their lives apart, silence and loneliness seemed to be their only companions. The house was now filled with a cold distance, tension, and emptiness. James's father withdrew into himself, not wanting to have anything to do with either his wife or his son. His looks, filled with accusation and pain, were worse than any words, and this invisible wall of rejection and alienation became stronger every day. Linda could no longer stay under the same roof with her husband, not even finding the strength to talk to him. Her soul, torn apart between duty and love, could no longer exist in this environment where every corner of the house bore traces of their misfortune. Her heart yearned for James, but her mind pulled her back, reminding her that the ruined family, the broken fate of her husband, was her responsibility, her fault. She couldn't continue to play the role of a faithful wife, but leaving her husband alone also seemed like a betrayal. Nevertheless, both James and Linda understood that it was impossible to hide forever, that they needed to make a final decision. Everything that had happened up to that moment, secret meetings, kisses and hugs, their nightly conversations and silence, was their escape from reality, their attempt to create their own little universe where they could be happy. But their love, so strong and true, could not exist in isolation from the world. Until the end, but could not. Until the end, they had to decide whether they could continue to live this love or leave it in the past, like a forbidden but precious dream. One night, when James as usual sneaked into her room to stay with her at least for a while, they sat silently next to each other, feeling that this moment would be the last. Linda looked at his face, memorizing every feature, every line. She knew that this man had become everything to her that filled her life with meaning, but now she had to let him go in order to save what little remained of her family. And James knew that he couldn't look at her anymore without feeling this endless pain. In the morning, Linda made her decision. She couldn't keep tearing herself apart between her love for James and her duty to her family. She knew that their passion, their deep bond, would always live in her heart, but it was time for her to be free. James's father had once been a close person to her, and despite all the pain, he remained a part of her life. She knew that her duty to him and to herself was to let James go and let everyone heal their wounds. Linda packed her things and left the house. When she left, she didn't tell James where she was going, and she didn't leave any promises. She just walked away, leaving behind silence and memories that will live with her forever. She knew that leaving was her way to protect their love from destruction, to preserve it as a bright memory that would accompany her for the rest of her life. This departure was her release, painful but inevitable. After she left, James was left alone, feeling that something had disappeared from his life with her that he would never be able to return. Her absence became a pain for him, which he carried with him everywhere. He knew that they had made the right choice, that this love was too destructive for them, but he could not get rid of the memories that reminded him of her every day. Linda had left a mark on his life that nothing could erase. As time went on, James tried to start a new life. He returned to the city where he had spent many years before, immersed in work and trying to forget about the past. It seemed to him that the hustle and bustle of the city and new acquaintances would help him get rid of the pain. But every morning and every evening he remembered those moments that he spent with Linda. This love became a secret for him, which he carried in his heart, hiding it from everyone. She was his pain and his comfort, his quiet secret that no one could understand. Linda found her refuge in a small town, far from everything that connected her with the past. She lived a modest life, doing simple things and trying to forget everything that ruined her former life. But every night, when she was alone in her room, she remembered James, his look, his voice, his touch. This love, which had once been her source of joy, now became her personal cross, her heavy burden that she could not get rid of. Time, however, was gradually healing the wounds, and although neither Linda nor James could completely forget each other, they learned to live with these memories. They realized that their love, despite all the suffering, was real and deep. She gave them something important that has now become a part of themselves, albeit hidden from everyone. Their bond remained invisible, but strong, like a memory they cherished. Linda and James became part of each other's past, which changed their lives forever. And although they never met again, each of them knew that somewhere out there, far away, there was a man who once was everything to them, who forever remained a part of their hearts. It has been several years since Linda and James broke up, each choosing their own path. Time slowly healed the wounds, but, as often happens, the memories of past love did not disappear completely. For James, her image became a ghost that he carried with him, a part of his heart, hidden behind 7 locks, inaccessible to anyone but him. He was building a new life in the city, immersing himself in work, traveling, meeting new people. But every time he closed his eyes, he imagined her warm smile, her gaze filled with passion and tenderness. He achieved what he wanted. He built the career he had always dreamed of, became an independent and respected person. But whenever he looked at himself in the mirror, he saw not just a successful professional, but also a man who had lost something that no success could replace. He tried to fall in love again, but all his relationships were superficial. In each new person he saw something that reminded him of Linda, and each new attempt seemed to him only a distant reflection of the love he had experienced. Linda, having settled in a small town, lived a quiet, almost ascetic life. She avoided all luxury and noisy surroundings, preferring privacy and simplicity. The years have left their mark on her face, but in her gaze there remained the same strength and bitterness that have become part of her character. She rarely talked to people about her past and tried to avoid any topics that might bring her back to those days. There was nothing in her small apartment that reminded her of James, but his image lived in her memory, strong and unyielding, like a tree that survived a storm. But at some point, fate decided to remind them of themselves. One day, James, while on a business trip, decided to visit a neighboring town to inspect one place for a new project. He had no idea that just a few miles away was the very town where Linda had found her refuge. Late in the evening, not knowing what to do in a small, unfamiliar town, he decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. He walked through streets that were unfamiliar to him, enjoying the peace and quiet that he had not experienced in the bustle of the city for a long time. Lost in his thoughts, he suddenly felt that someone was looking at him. James looked up and froze. Linda was standing just a few steps away from him. James seemed to have stopped, She didn't seem to have changed, and her presence was as strong as before. She looked at him as if trying to make sure that it was really him, that their meeting was not a marriage, not a figment of the imagination, but reality. James stepped forward, and the two of them stood hesitating to take the next step, not knowing how to react to such an unexpected collision. James suggested that Linda go for a walk together, to complete a story that had remained unfinished. They were silent for a long time, but the silence did not require a walk together, and tell him how she had lived all these years. Linda nodded, and they went for a quiet walk together, and tell him how she had lived all these years. Linda nodded, and they went for a quiet walk together, joined in their thoughts of Linda, so different from who she had been at home, in kindness. During the walk, James told her how he had tried to forget her, how he had built his life, but he had never been able to find anyone who was as dear to him as she was. Linda, hearing his words, felt her heart clench with pain again, but she listened in silence without interrupting him. She herself told how she tried to move on, how she settled in a new town, hoping to forget her past, but her life remained only an empty shell filled with memories. These frank conversations, so necessary, became something of a cleansing for them. They walked late into the night, remembering the past, sharing pain and bitterness, and by morning they both felt that they had finally been able to let go of the part of themselves that had been bothering them for a long time. But something still remained, some thin thread that connected them and made them alien to others. A few days later they met again. Now they could just enjoy each other's company without thinking about the prohibitions and what others would say. Their relationship no longer had the secret, depressing depth it had before. It became calm, like a river flowing under a clear sky. They both knew that this was their second chance, and this time no one could stop them. James began to visit Linda more and more often, finding in her presence that calmness that he so lacked in life. They spent time together, talking, laughing, talking about the past and about the future, which seemed completely different to them now. Linda felt alive again, feeling the warmth she had missed so much. She was no longer the same young woman, full of passion and desire, but her love for James remained as pure as before. Their new union was not like the previous stormy and passionate relationship. Now it was a mature, deep affection, tested by time and pain. They both understood that their love might never be the same again, but it wasn't important to them either. The main thing was that they could be together again, that now nothing could stop them. After that unexpected meeting, Linda and James seemed to have found a second wind. Every day spent together seemed like a gift to them, and the future no longer scared them so much. But both Linda and James understood that they had a lot of questions ahead of them that they would have to look for answers to, and life would not be easy because they decided to start all over again. Their past, their old pain, was still a part of their destinies, and they couldn't just leave this burden behind. They realized that they needed to be honest with each other so as not to repeat past mistakes. James has made an important decision to stay in this small town. He was able to find a remote job that allowed him to stay close to Linda and still maintain the usual rhythm of life without getting attached to the hustle and bustle of the big city. Life in the town was simpler, slower. There was no rush and excessive ambition that often poisoned his life in the city. He liked it here because it was connected to her. Everything here, even the quiet streets and small cafes where he spent his mornings, reminded him of Linda. Linda, restrained and practical, although she was glad that he stayed, was still afraid to make plans for the future. The years that had passed had left their mark on her, making her cautious, and every time she allowed herself to believe in their shared happiness, her heart sank with anxiety. She was afraid that this new attempt, like the previous one, would bring pain. But James tried to convince her that everything would be different now, that they had both changed and were ready to move forward, forgetting old mistakes. They often spent evenings together, getting out to the lake near the town. This lake had a special, almost magical atmosphere. The water reflected the starry sky, and in the silence of the night, they could talk about everything in the world without fear of being judged or misunderstood. At such moments, Linda allowed herself to be real, shared her doubts and fears with him, and each time her heart became a little lighter, and their bond became stronger. One day, after a long evening by the lake, James decided to have a frank conversation. He understood that they both wanted this future, but in order for it to become a reality, they had to say everything they were afraid to say.
Linda, I know you're still afraid. You think we're going to do something wrong again, that everything will fall apart again, but I'm not going to lose you again. This time I want it to be different.
James, it's not that easy. You say that everything will be different, but I'm afraid that we and our world have already changed too much. What if these memories, this old pain, will always be between us?
I'm not asking you to forget the past. I want us to accept it so that it stays with us, but does not rule us. We've been through a lot, Linda. We both had to endure pain that we would never have chosen for ourselves, but now it has made us stronger.
I also want to believe that this time we can be happy, but sometimes I feel like the whole world will stand up to us again if we just let our feelings run wild. It's like living in the expectation that something is going to go wrong.
Linda, we've both been in each other's thoughts and memories for so many years, not separating even when we were hundreds of miles apart. We have withstood this, and this is already proof that we are capable of coping with anything. And now I'm just asking you to be with me, not to run away like before. Let yourself be happy.
I'm not afraid for myself, James. I'm afraid for you. After all, you need more than just a quiet life with me in this small town. You deserve the future you dreamed of, and that doesn't connect you to the past.
But, Linda, you're part of my future. Always have been and always will be. All my dreams that I once thought about didn't make sense because you weren't in them. For this, I am ready to stay here, ready to change everything if it means that we can be together.
Linda was silent, feeling these words penetrate deep into her heart. She knew that he was sincere, but her anxiety, her doubts did not disappear. She understood that now they were older and stronger, that their feelings were no longer limited to youthful passion and outbursts as they once were. But the fear of condemnation, of the difficulties awaiting them again, did not let her go. She was afraid to get attached to this new future, afraid that it might be taken away from her again. The next day, James suggested that they take a small step forward and find a place where they could live together, away from prying eyes. He wanted Linda to feel safe, so that she would know that next to him she would not have to constantly look back at other people's opinions. He found a small house on the outskirts of the town, surrounded by a forest, where they could enjoy silence and freedom from a biased environment. This house would be a new beginning for them, a place where the past would no longer affect their lives. Linda, although she agreed to look at the house, still remained wary. She thought that such solitude could help them find happiness, but she couldn't help feeling that it might not be enough, that they would be haunted not only by the past, but also by the shadow of society hanging over them. She was worried that their love, even in silence and solitude, would not be able to free itself from the fears that lived inside her. When they reached the house, James was the first to go inside and invited Linda. She looked around. A small house with a cozy kitchen, a spacious living room, and a bedroom with a view of the forest. The house seemed warm and welcoming, as if it was inviting them to stay. For the first time in a long time, Linda felt at peace, and it seemed to her that here, in this secluded place, they could start over, leaving everything behind.
Linda, I know you're not sure, but it seems to me that here, away from everything, we can be happy. This house can be our refuge. Here we don't have to explain our love to anyone but ourselves.
I feel like this place is like home. And you're right, here we can be who we are. But are you ready for this kind of life, James? Are you ready to spend it with me when you could have had everything?
Linda, everything is not something I would have lost without you. Everything is you. I want this house, this future, this peace of mind. All this is for us.
Linda felt her heart, which had long been hardened by pain and fear, begin to thaw. She saw in his eyes the determination and love that he had been trying to convey to her for so long, and she knew that these feelings were true. She took a step towards him, and at that moment, everything inside her calmed down. This house could really be their new beginning, if they were both willing to let go of the past and let happiness in. That day, they decided to stay in this house. Linda understood that the future was not a guarantee of happiness, that difficulties awaited them. But now she had something more. There was a man next to her who was ready to go through everything with her that might come their way. It's only been a couple of months since Linda and James moved into their small house on the outskirts of town, trying to start a new life. The secluded house among the trees really became a refuge for them, where they could enjoy peace and forget about other people's views. This place became their little world, protected from those who could not or would not accept their love. James set up work remotely and began to create his own project, putting all his strength into it and trying to arrange a new life in this town where he thought he found meaning. Linda helped him, supporting him in everything, and, it seemed, she gradually began to put up with the past, gaining confidence that their relationships can be real and enduring. But her fears still wouldn't let her go completely. Sometimes, when she looked at James, she saw not just the man she loved, but all the pain that was associated with it. Life flowed on at its own pace, but soon the first shadows appeared on the horizon, which reminded them that their happiness might not be so unshakable. One morning, when James returned home after a trip downtown to buy groceries, he noticed that Linda looked worried and silent. Usually calm and collected, she sat by the window, looking into the distance, clearly lost in her thoughts. James tried to find out what was bothering her, but Linda, as always, just waved it off, assuring him that it was not worth his concern. However, her behavior began to change. Linda began to avoid frequent walks into the city, became nervous and wary. James couldn't figure out what was causing this behavior, but he felt that something was bothering her. In the end, he was faced with something that knocked him out of his rut. One day, when he left the store, he was approached by a man who, as it turned out, was their old acquaintance from the past, Mark. Mark, despite his courteous smile, was one of those who knew about the old story between James and Linda, and did not miss the opportunity to gossip about the past. Mark immediately began to ask James curiously about how he and Linda were doing, what they were doing, and what had brought them back to the small town. James, keeping calm, tried to answer as discreetly as possible, without giving unnecessary details, but with each question Mark became more mocking and sarcastic, as if testing his strength. The feeling that Mark knew something, and there was no hiding it, made James uneasy. He realized that the shadow of their past was no longer just a memory. It had found a face, and that face was looking at him with an unkind smile. When James returned home, he decided to tell Linda about his meeting with Mark. He hoped that they could discuss it calmly and find a way to protect their happiness, but Linda took the news differently. Her face turned pale and she looked lost.
Linda, I understand that meeting Mark is not the most pleasant thing that could happen, but we knew that sooner or later it would happen. We can't hide forever.
James, you don't understand. These are more than just unpleasant memories. Mark has always been like that. Always knew how to add fuel to the fire. He won't leave us alone. He lives for such moments.
But we're not going to let him ruin what we have, are we? Linda, we chose this path, and now I will not back down. I'm not going to let him interfere in our lives again.
James, I'm afraid that if Mark starts spreading rumors, people will start remembering who we are again. They will start judging us. And this whole city, it could all destroy us again.
James was silent, feeling the weight of her words. He understood that Linda was not afraid of Mark himself, but of the fact that their past would start to put pressure on them again, forcing them to either hide or justify themselves to the whole world. In their small town, rumors spread faster than the wind, and he knew that once one person started discussing their relationship, the others would pick it up with a bang. The rumors really started to spread. A few days later, they noticed that people in the city began to look at them differently. When Linda met with her neighbors, she saw in their eyes the same condemnation that she had already faced many years ago. Old acquaintances avoided the conversation, answered evasively, or completely changed the subject, as if their union with James was something shameful, something that should not be spoken out loud. Linda began to feel like a stranger among people again, and this feeling, long forgotten, was now even more painful than before. At one of the doctor's appointments in the town, she heard one of the local women whispering about her to a friend, not hiding the condemnation in her voice. Linda realized that their happy, quiet life in solitude had been disrupted. It seemed that every step back into the city they now took with the feeling of a gaze directed directly at them, as if at gunpoint. And although James tried to support her, he also began to get annoyed that he and Linda were being evaluated and judged again.
Linda, why should we worry about these people? Why do they have the right to decide who we are and how we should feel?
Because they are a society, James. And if we want to live here, we'll either have to comply or leave. I thought we could be happy, but,
Linda, no, we will not leave. We have already made this choice, and I am ready to fight for us. If someone doesn't like us being together, so be it, but I won't let them destroy us again.
These words were like a breath of air to Linda. She could see that James was determined, that his strength and confidence in their love were genuine. But she also understood that society rarely changes its mind. Even if they decided to ignore the gossip, it did not guarantee them a quiet life. There was a struggle inside her between the fear of judgment and the desire to finally be truly happy. She knew that living with this fear meant never became completely free. In the following days, James and Linda tried to ignore the tension around them. They continued to go out together, visit the shops, and just enjoy their home, not letting anyone or anything ruin their lives. But the mounting pressure made them feel like their world was collapsing again. Linda couldn't stand being in the city, feeling the eyes on her, and James was increasingly annoyed by these restrictions. He realized that it would be difficult for Linda to stay in such an environment, and he needed to find a way to protect her from these people. One day, returning home after one of these walks, Linda stopped at the door, feeling that she could no longer continue like this. She looked at James, and he saw pain and fatigue in her eyes, the same feelings that had tormented her all these years.
James, I don't know how much longer I can take this. I don't want to lose us, but I can't continue to live in fear of every exit from home either.
We'll find a way, Linda. I won't give up. We deserve this happiness, and if necessary, I will protect you from the whole world.
These words of James became an unexpected support and inspiration for her. They did not know what lay ahead, but they were ready to go through all the trials. Linda felt that, despite all the fear, all the doubts, her love for James was something worth fighting for, no matter what others thought. The evenings in their house became quieter and more intense. Every time she and James got together for dinner or went out for a walk, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that they were now under an invisible gun. She noticed how evasive glances and restrained whispers were increasingly running through the town as soon as they appeared in the field of view of someone she knew or even random passers-by. This hum of condemnation and discussion seemed to follow them everywhere, and Linda realized that it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to cope with it. She knew that James was doing everything he could to support her. He was ready to defend her at any moment, looked at her with the same love and confidence with which their new life began, and always reminded her that she was more important to him than any public opinion. But despite his words, Linda's inner anxiety wouldn't let her go. She understood that their past, their history, still served as a reason for gossip for others, and this atmosphere filled her heart with anxiety and doubts that she could not ignore. With each passing day, Linda began to doubt her decision more and more. She saw how James was trying to create a private space for them in which they could be happy, but more and more often, It seemed to her that this happiness remained under threat. Sometimes she thought that maybe their love should have remained a memory, and that their new beginning was a mistake, an attempt to realize a dream that could never exist in reality. Anxiety made her wake up at night, go outside and peer into the night sky, as if she was trying to find answers among the stars. She recalled how many years ago they had already gone through this pressure and condemnation, and realized that her fears were not just an obsession. Linda was afraid that if they stayed here, if they tried to stand up to the whole society, sooner or later, their love would be destroyed again. This time completely. James noticed how her gaze became more and more sullen, as her usual gentleness was replaced by anxiety and aloofness. She began to spend more time alone, walking alone for long periods, or sitting by the window, immersed in her own thoughts. He understood that something was tearing her apart from the inside, but he also knew that she was not ready to share her fears with him, for fear of hurting him and destroying their shaky world. One evening, Linda returned home after another walk, sat down in an armchair by the fireplace, and sat for a long time looking into the fire. The inner monologue that she led with herself every night began to come out. She thought that perhaps it was she who was dragging them down, that her inability to free herself from the past and accept herself in this relationship was becoming an obstacle to their happiness. She recalled her earlier doubts, her insecurities, and it seemed to her that all her fears had only intensified over the years. No matter how hard she tried, it was hard for her to believe that they could be together without fear of condemnation and suffering. Day after day, her anxiety increased, and at some point, Linda began to seriously consider the possibility of leaving. It seemed to her that if she left, James would be able to find a more peaceful life for himself. He would be able to find the harmony that is currently inaccessible to them. Linda couldn't get rid of the thought that her presence weighed on him, that she had become for him not a source of happiness, but a cause of constant stress and frustration. She didn't want their love to turn into torment. Several times she even considered leaving, but every time she looked at James, her resolve weakened. His calmness, his confidence, his willingness to fight for them made her stay. But this only temporarily drowned out her anxiety, and soon the thought that she was hurting him returned again. She couldn't get rid of this feeling, and it gradually consumed her, forcing her to move further away from James. She began to shut herself in even more, avoiding talking about the future, and even short moments of happiness seemed to her a deception. Every time they laughed together, or did something simple like cooking dinner or going out for an evening walk, Linda felt that this was a temporary calm, that something dark and inescapable was hiding behind it. One night, unable to stand it, she gathered her thoughts and decided to talk to James. She needed to figure out if her doubts were really justified or if her anxiety was just a fear created by herself. She wanted to know if he was ready to put up with all this for them, if he was ready to go through the condemnation and pressure that was getting stronger every day. Linda knew that if he gave her even a hint of doubt, if he told her that he was tired of all this too, she would leave and never look back. However, after talking to James, Linda received the same assurance as before. He wasn't ready to leave her, wasn't ready to give up his love for peace of mind. It only made sense to him when she was around. He knew that a difficult path awaited them, but he was ready to accept this test. Linda realized that she would have to choose. Either believe in his strength and be with him despite her fears, or leave, as she had wanted to do many years ago, leaving him alone with this unfulfilled future. That night, after talking to James, Linda sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about her decision. Her anxiety did not disappear, but a new thin thread of confidence appeared in her heart. She knew that if she left now, she would lose James forever, and her fears would become an eternal burden for her, which she would never get rid of. She realized that she needed to stop running away and start fighting for what was really important to her, for the love that gave her a new meaning in life. But even this understanding could not completely extinguish her doubts. Now Linda stood on the threshold of two roads. One led her back to solitude, where she could hide from all worries and condemnation, forgetting about James, but with him forgetting about happiness. Another road led her to a life with him, full of difficulties, but also of hope, which was with her as long as he stayed by her side. Linda knew that the choice was hers, and although she was scared, she realized that if she chose love, she would have to accept all the hardships that come with her. Over the next few weeks, Linda and James tried to find a balance between their feelings and obsessive fears, which slowly eroded their trust in each other. Linda, although she decided to stay, still had mixed feelings. Every day, she struggled with the anxiety that one day their world would collapse again and she would be left alone. James felt her isolation and tried to support her, but despite his best efforts, Linda continued to feel insecure. Meanwhile, rumors and reproachful glances from neighbors had already become an integral part of their lives, and Linda, although she tried to get used to it, could not get rid of the fear of a new round of condemnation. She tried in every possible way to avoid unnecessary communication in the town and found solace only in solitude. But one day, this fragile, calm atmosphere cracked again. One day, when James was downtown on business, he accidentally met a woman he hadn't seen for a long time, Caroline, his old friend and work colleague, with whom he worked together at his first place in the city many years ago. They were close friends, but over time they broke up because of different views on life and just lost contact. However, when James met her again, he felt a wave of nostalgia and joy. Caroline had always been a bright, confident, inspiring and cheerful person. They hugged, laughed, and reminisced about old days, chatting about work, friends, and life. This meeting seemed to bring James back to the days when his life was simpler, when he could not worry about every little thing and enjoy the ease. They talked about everything in the world, and Caroline enthusiastically offered to drink coffee and chat some more. She warmed James's soul easily, and he did not notice how time flew by. For him, it was an instant return to clearer times, when he was free from complicated emotions and obligations. They agreed to meet again in a few days, and this meeting was just as warm and filled with light. Caroline, with her usual ease, hugged James when they met, laughed at his jokes, and talked about her travels and new hobbies. James enjoyed her company, forgetting about time, and Caroline became for him again what once filled his life. Fresh breath, a warm friend with whom he could talk about everything. However, Linda soon noticed a change in James's behavior. He began to spend more time outside the house, returned with a thoughtful look, and was often in a thoughtful mood. She guessed that something was bothering him, but she couldn't figure out what the reason was, and her anxiety increased. It seemed to her that perhaps she was pushing him away with her doubts and fears, forcing him to seek solace elsewhere. But because of her own doubts, she hesitated to ask James questions directly, afraid to hear what she was most afraid of. A few weeks after his first meetings with Caroline, James decided that it would be great to introduce her to Linda. He felt that Linda lacked confidence and support, and thought that Caroline could be an inspiring example for her, showing that there is both light and joy in the world if you let them enter your life. For him, Caroline was just a friend with whom he could talk, and he did not imagine that this meeting could turn out to be anything else for Linda. When he introduced Linda to Caroline, Linda's reaction was far from what he had expected. Caroline, as always, was cordial and open, enthusiastically talking to Linda, praising her for a cozy home and talking about her projects and travels. But Linda felt uncomfortable. With every word Caroline said, with every smile she gave James, Linda felt a growing sense of jealousy and anxiety. Linda couldn't get rid of the thought that Caroline was bringing James the joy and light that she herself lacked, and this jealousy began to overwhelm her. She couldn't admit it to herself or James, but every time Caroline stayed by his side, Linda felt like an outsider. It seemed to her that this woman, with her ease and optimism, could give James what he lacked in a relationship with her. These thoughts filled her soul, and she increasingly found herself in a state of despair, locking herself in a room or going for long walks to hide her tears and pain. With each new meeting between James and Caroline, Linda's jealousy grew stronger. She saw how James glowed, how he became animated in her presence, how there was a lightness and spark in his eyes that she could not awaken in him. Her heart, already tormented by fears, was becoming more and more vulnerable. Linda was beginning to think that maybe James would be happier with someone like Caroline, with a woman unencumbered by the past and not living in constant doubt. Several times Linda even tried to tell James about her feelings, to admit that her jealousy and pain had become unbearable for her, but each time she stopped herself, afraid to destroy the fragile thing that remained between them. She didn't want James to think that she was limiting him, that her feelings were turning into chains for their relationship. But one day, Linda finally couldn't stand it. She saw James and Caroline saying goodbye after the meeting, and when he returned home, her face expressed all the pain that had accumulated over the weeks. Her gaze was heavy, full of unexpressed jealousy and bitterness. She didn't say a word, but James understood that her anxiety, her fears, and jealousy were too strong to just disappear. He saw that Linda could not accept their friendship with Caroline, that this woman had become for her a symbol of all her worries and doubts that she had been living with for the last few months. James tried to explain to Linda that Caroline was just a friend to him, that she was just a random guest from the past, and his heart belonged only to her. But Linda couldn't listen to any more excuses. Her jealousy, her insecurities had become too strong for her to ignore, and now she was faced with a choice, again, to continue to endure this inner pain or to distance herself, protecting herself from the destructive feeling. Linda knew that if she stayed, her jealousy could destroy them both, destroy what little they had been building for so long. Her love for James was too strong for her to afford to lose him, but her jealousy was now becoming a torment for her that she could no longer bear. After the night Linda saw James with Caroline, her world was completely shaken. Everything she felt, fear, insecurity, and jealousy, had now reached its peak. Her mind was full of anxious thoughts, and every interaction with James, every word or look, only reinforced her feeling that their relationship was becoming a difficult ordeal, and not salvation, as she had dreamed at first. From the moment Caroline reappeared in their lives, Linda felt increasingly alienated and detached. Her jealousy of Caroline, of her natural lightness, optimism, and confident demeanor, was becoming unbearable. It seemed that Caroline was for James what Linda could not and did not have time to become. This feeling of alienation and her own insecurity was deeply undermining her, and every day she believed more and more that James deserved someone who could give him happiness without the burden of doubt that she brought with her. James, for his part, noticed how Linda began to withdraw into herself more and more. He saw that her eyes had dimmed, and the usual tenderness and care had been replaced by detachment and coldness. It was painful for him to watch how the woman he loved more than life seemed to be moving away every day, retreating into her own shadows and fears. But he felt helpless, not knowing how to help Linda, not realizing that her pain now is not just the result of social pressure, but also her own torment. Previously born personal experience deciding it would be the last blow for her. She was afraid that if she expressed her thoughts, that maybe James would be happier without her. He might agree, and this moment would be the last blow for her. So every day, she bore her pain in silence, deciding it was better to hide her feelings than risk what little they had left. She was afraid that if she expressed her thoughts, then maybe James would be happier without her. He might be as well kept away from the responsibility having taken on so soon in his life. A lost part of him that was hidden, safe. One day, when James was returning home after meeting Caroline, he found Linda packing her things. She was silently putting her things in a small bag, lowering her head and avoiding his gaze. The sight of her about to leave the house struck him to the core. He knew that their relationship was under threat, but until the last moment, he hoped that he would be able to keep her. But this moment, when Linda decided to leave, made him feel the reality of the situation. For Linda, this decision was painful, but at the same time the only possible one. She could no longer bear the feeling that she was hurting the man she loved with her jealousy and inner struggle. It seemed to her that by leaving James, she would free him from this burden, give him a chance for a peaceful and happy future. She hoped that his meeting with Caroline would be the impetus that would give him the opportunity to live a full life, not held back by her past and her insecurities. When James finally stopped her and asked her to explain what was going on, Linda exhaled, as if releasing all the weight she carried inside her. She told him about her jealousy, about the pain she felt every time she saw him brighten up in Caroline's presence. She confessed that she felt unnecessary, a stranger in his life, that it seemed to her that her love only limited him and destroyed his joy. She explained that she could no longer live with this feeling and therefore decided to leave so that he would be free. Listening to her words, James felt a mixture of pain and despair. He understood that Linda was torn between her love for him and her self-doubt. He understood that her jealousy was not just distrust, it was her inner struggle that she waged with herself every day, and he was part of that struggle. Realizing this, he decided to show her that her fears were wrong, that his love for her remained unshakable, despite all the trials they had gone through. James walked up to Linda and stopped her, looking into her eyes with that calmness that always gave her a sense of security. He told her that he understood her worries and her insecurities, but also made it clear that he wasn't going to leave her because of Caroline or anyone else. He reminded her that their relationship had always been difficult, that they had always faced difficulties, but together they could overcome everything. Linda listened to his words, and light gradually broke through in her heart, displacing the darkness that she had carried for so long. It seemed to her that James saw through her, that he understood all her fears and worries. His words, his confidence in their love, his desire to fight for them, even when she herself had almost given up, gave her hope again. They talked for a long time, sitting next to each other, and that evening Linda felt that her soul had finally begun to free itself from the burden that she had been carrying for so long. She realized that James was there not because he felt obligation or pity, but because his love for her was as strong as her love for him. He showed her that their bond was deeper than all external difficulties and judgments, that they were not just a couple, but two people who supported each other in the most difficult moments. After this conversation, Linda began to see their future in a new light. Her doubts and fears have not completely disappeared, but she has gained the strength to fight them rather than let them rule her life. Now she knew that her jealousy and insecurity would not be able to destroy their relationship if she was honest with herself and with James. The next morning, Linda and James made an important decision. They decided that they would build their lives the way they see fit, without regard to other people's opinions and condemnation. They realized that their happiness is their own right, and no one has the right to dictate to them how they should live. It was their common decision, and now they were ready to protect their life from all external threats. Now that there was nothing left unsaid between them, they felt that they had become even closer to each other. Linda gained the confidence she so lacked, and James saw that his love and dedication helped her cope with her inner fears. Their relationship became more mature and strong, and they both knew that, despite all the difficulties, they were ready to move forward together. These difficult days, filled with jealousy and doubts, became an important test for them, which helped them understand how deep their feelings are. They realized that their love can withstand any test if they are honest with each other and are ready to fight for their happiness. After their frank conversation, when Linda decided to openly share her fears and jealousy, and James supported her with unwavering confidence, their lives finally found peace. That night, when they revealed their innermost feelings to each other, was a turning point for them. That night, Linda felt that for the first time in many years, she no longer carried the burden of the past, that her inner fears and pain were letting her go, freeing her for a new, more peaceful life. James was there for her. His faith in their love and tenderness became a solid support for her to lean on, getting rid of doubts and painful thoughts. Now they both understood that their future would be the way they decided to make it, and that no one but themselves could dictate to them how they should live and love each other. This realization filled their lives with the light and peace they had been waiting for so long. Since then, their days have gained a new meaning and harmony. James suggested that Linda make their home even more comfortable and start small changes that could symbolize their new beginning. Together they rearranged the furniture, decorated the rooms with small details that pleased their hearts. Their home gradually became a real refuge where they could enjoy each other's company without looking back at the world beyond. They found a special joy in this process. By creating comfort, they felt like they were building not only a house, but also their common future, where love and mutual understanding reign. Linda was happy to observe the changes. Her heart no longer clenched with anxiety at every step, and now she even began to enjoy the rare trips to the town. She no longer felt guilty and a stranger among people. Her heart calmed down, and she began to accept herself for who she was, knowing that James loved her despite all her fears and imperfections. She could see that James appreciated the real her, and it gave her the confidence she had long dreamed of. During one of their conversations, James suggested spending time outside their familiar world. They decided to go on a short trip to get away from everything that was connected with the city, with their past, and see new places. They went to the old picturesque coast, where the blue water met the sandy shore, and the sea washed their hearts and washed away the remnants of past worries. This journey became a new symbol of freedom for them. Now they belonged only to each other and were away from everything that once brought pain. Every day spent on the coast was filled with joy. Linda and James walked along the shore, holding hands, feeling happier than ever. In the silence of nature, they could enjoy simple moments, sunrises and sunsets, the quiet rustle of waves, and the cries of seagulls. These moments made them realize that happiness does not require great achievements and does not depend on the approval of society. Their little joys and moments of intimacy became for them the most reliable foundation on which they could build their lives. After this journey, they returned to their home, filled with new strength and confidence in their feelings. Now their lives were filled with rituals that they created together, whether it was evening walks around the neighborhood, reading books by the fireplace, or cooking dinner together. These little moments became a source of joy for them, and each of them filled their home with warmth and love. James continued to work remotely, and Linda found her calling in running a small garden around their house. The garden became for her a kind of symbol of their relationship. It required attention and care, but also brought fruits that filled her with pride and joy. She planted flowers, grew vegetables and fruits, and every day she saw their garden getting more beautiful. This garden was for her a place where she could reflect, relax, and find peace. Now every corner of their house was soaked with a piece of their love. The residents of the town eventually accepted their presence and stopped discussing them behind their backs. People were used to seeing Linda and James together, and their lives no longer seemed strange or challenging to anyone. Over time, the neighbors began to greet them with sincere smiles, waving a friendly hand when they met. Linda realized that over time, all the fears and judgments had simply disappeared, and now they could live the way they wanted. The people around them stopped judging them for what happened in the past, and no longer tried to get into their lives, realizing that this was their choice, and it was made consciously. Now they both found peace. James was no longer afraid of losing Linda, knowing that her love for him was as strong as his for her. And Linda finally accepted herself, her past, and her new life. She no longer felt the need to prove her right to happiness to someone, and did not look back.